This is Chad. For the average person, this is perhaps the worst country in the world. Let's start with standard of living. Extreme poverty is on the rise. Already one of the highest globally, over 35% of the population are earning less than $2.15 a day. The Human Development Index takes into account a variety of factors, including life expectancy, per capita income, and years of schooling. Chad is ranked fourth worst in the world, meaning they fail in every category. Let's break this down. First, they have the worst life expectancy in the world, just 52 years. But why is this? Well, a big problem is infant mortality. As most families lack food security and basic healthcare services, 1 in 5 Chadian children will not reach the age of 5. 40% of them suffer from stunted growth, meaning they do not develop properly growing up, in both a physical and cognitive sense. So the opportunity to provide value and make a decent living as adults is limited. GDP per capita is the best measure of yearly output per person. This figure in Chad is a measly $1,000. Most of the population, up to 80%, work in agriculture. And this isn't efficient, high-tech farming by any means. Most activities are subsistence and herding based. These people are far away from any urban benefits. Less than 10% have access to electricity and the internet. Full education is a rarity. Children spend on average 5 years in school. In fact, they are more likely to die before the age of 5 than attend secondary school. As a result, the literacy rate is remarkably low. It's 35% for males and 18% for females. This highlights yet another problem: inequality. Women have little to no work opportunities and are expected to marry and bear children extremely young. Only 50% of women participate in the labour force, but about 67% are first married before 18. Chad's human rights record has taken a hit in recent years, particularly due to political violence and instability plaguing the country. After the murder of President Deby by a rebel militia in 2021, coup attempts, demonstrations, and constant corruption have led to numerous killings. To make matters worse, their economy has been tanking in recent years. 2 recessions in 5 years have pushed hundreds of thousands more into poverty. Without significant change, the future looks bleak for Chad. But to properly assess this future, we need to dive into their history and analyse exactly how this nation functions. Chad was originally a French colony. During this rule, France saw Chad as a source of raw materials and labour, with little interest in developing infrastructure or improving living standards. They exploited Chad's cotton and livestock industries, funneling the wealth out of the country, leaving them with a weak economic foundation. So when Chad finally gained independence in 1960, turbulence awaited. The new nation was marked by internal conflicts as various ethnic and regional groups vied for power. The central government was powerless. The first major civil war began in 1965 and lasted 14 years, pitting northern Muslim groups against the southern Christian population. This war destroyed what little infrastructure existed and displaced thousands of people. Chad became so fragile that Libya saw an opportunity to pounce and fill the power vacuum. This failed, mainly due to the new brutal French-backed president Hissène Habré. Throughout the 80s, Chad was under Habré's extreme dictatorship. His regime was an authoritarian structure that relied on widespread human rights abuses and corruption to maintain power. He was eventually overthrown in 1990, and in 2016 he was sentenced to life in prison for human rights abuses, as well as the systematic killing of over 40,000 people. Idriss Déby came to power in 1990. His government, though more stable than Habré's, was also marred by corruption. Personal power and wealth was always prioritised over national development. This was demonstrated most by their discovery of oil in 2003. This was the opportunity Chad had always waited for. Could they finally find peace and prosperity? Of course not. Instead, another civil war erupted. Despite agreements with the World Bank to use oil profits for poverty reduction, significant portions of these funds were diverted to military spending and personal enrichment of the elite. This conflict drained the very resources they aimed to control. Poverty deepened, but Déby survived nonetheless. He removed the 2-term presidential limit, becoming Chad's dictator. Fierce opposition remained. A coup was foiled in 2013, but in 2021, Déby was killed fighting on the front lines against a rebel incursion. His son, Mohamed Déby, was swiftly appointed as the head of a transitional military council. This move effectively suspended the constitution and dissolved the National Assembly. This is currently being met with protests, with a heavy-handed response from security forces. years. Many demonstrators have died, and Chad has again come into question for human rights abuses. A proper election is coming, which Deby is expected to win comfortably, though few expect the vote to be fair. He has begun creating ties with the UAE and Russia for military and financial support, drifting away from decades of Western allyship. So it seems that despite public dissatisfaction, democracy remains years, possibly decades away. The inevitability of continued corruption automatically places them a few steps behind on economic progress. But how exactly does their economy work? Chad relies on three main streams of income: oil, agriculture, and foreign aid. Oil is by far the largest industry, accounting for 76% of total exports. This is spread across the world, including to many advanced economies such as Germany, China, and the UAE. Their over-reliance on a single product, however, is unsustainable and dangerous. The 2015 oil price shock sent Chad into a deep 3-year-long recession, which repeated during the height of the COVID pandemic. Oil revenues have recovered since then, but due to corruption and the funneling of funds into government endeavours, barely any of these oil profits make it to the average person. Instead, Chadians rely on minimal farming output to make ends meet. Their labour force by sector looks reminiscent of a pre-industrial nation. It is effectively centuries behind most advanced economies in terms of development. Of course, agriculture does not automatically mean bad, but this case is striking. Most agriculture here is subsistence-based, meaning farmers can only grow crops and raise livestock to meet the needs of themselves and their immediate families. In other words, they work for survival and nothing more. When aligning Chad's ancient economic structure with their per capita output levels, it's not hard to see why the poverty statistics look so miserable. Chad is heavily reliant on imports for many of its essential goods, including vehicles, medical supplies, and construction materials. In a country where most live in poverty, their second most imported product is jewellery. Make of that what you will. The main trade partners for imports are China, UAE, and France. Another recent import has been Sudanese refugees. A huge civil war in neighbouring Sudan has displaced over 4 million people, many of them fleeing to the relative safety of Chad. Foreign aid has a huge part to play here. Given Chad's struggles, they are unable to provide for this sudden influx of people. Organisations such as the World Bank already play a crucial role in Chad's economy, funding many development projects, upgrading the agricultural sector, for example. The IMF plays the role of economic analysis, providing plans and setting goals. Their reports have outlined specific policy proposals, projecting extremely positive benefits to arrive as a result within the next decade. For example, by diversifying the economy and reducing dependence on oil, thereby becoming less vulnerable to oil price shocks. GDP growth can begin to stabilise. Using foreign aid to improve agricultural efficiency is a good starting point for diversification. This can provide a solid base where Chad can then invest in infrastructure within the main urban areas, increasing population and providing a workforce for brand new industry and financial service companies. To ensure vital funds funnel to the right places, corruption must be stopped. A good way to mitigate corruption is ensuring fair and free elections. This ensures that governments and leaders bear the consequences of their actions. If their corruption becomes known to the public, they can be voted or kicked out. International organisations are important for investigating and exposing any misuse of funds. Unfortunately, the future of democracy in Chad looks foggy. Deby's position is weak, so he now secures his grip in ways akin to previous dictators. The upcoming election will be rigged. The recent death of a prominent opposition leader is suspicious at best. New alliances forged with undemocratic superpowers, Russia and the UAE, shows a shift in ally preference from west to east. But then again, what reason do they even have to trust the West? Let's not forget, it was France who began the Chadian downward spiral.